To set up a rubric in your MyLO site to enable you to assess students and also to provide them with information about how they'll be assessed, start by going to the assessments link in the nav bar and then selecting the rubrics link from the drop down menu. Once you're in the rubrics tool, select the new rubric button, which is blue and on the left. And then in the properties, you need to put in information about the name of the rubric. What we normally do here is use the same name that is provided for students as the name of the assessment task that you will be using. So if, for example, you have an assignment called Technology Compare and Contrast, then you would type that in as the name of the rubric so that they match, which just helps to make everything clear for both yourself and for the students. The type of rubric is analytic. There is another option there which is holistic, and a holistic rubric is when you are only assessing one criterion. So you're using a single criterion to evaluate the entire piece of work. So typically at UTAS, we will use multiple criterion within a single assessment, and therefore the rubric type will almost always be analytic. The initial number of levels leave at 5. That represents the HD through down to the fail levels, and then the number of criterion which fits the assessment. So in my case, that is 4 criteria. You then have to choose the scoring method and whether that is going to be text only, points, or custom points. If you select text only, that means that you are using the rubric to assign a grade for each criteria. So you evaluate the criteria, assign a grade for that particular criteria, and then look at those grades to provide and use the grades that students got for each criteria to then assign a grade for the assessment overall. And then once you have that grade, you're then able to assign a mark based on where in that grade description or where in that grade the student's work best represented. If you're using a rubric and you want the rubric to automatically determine a mark for each criterion, so you want to assign a grade for the criterion and then within that criterion, within that grade, assign a mark and do that, and then have that calculated and use those marks then to determine what the overall grade and mark is. You can either use points or custom points. Points is when every criteria is weighted equally, so each criterion contributes equally to the overall grade for an overall mark for the assignment task. And custom points is when one or more criterion is worth a different amount, so is weighted differently from the other criteria. So once you've selected what works best for you, move on to the next step. So if you've selected a text-only scoring method, you can now save your properties, and you will not now be able to change the type or the scoring method for this rubric. So if you change your mind, you'll have to go back to the starting point and create a brand new rubric. So then you go to the Levels and Criteria tab, select the Levels and Criteria tab, and then select the action arrow to the right of criteria and select Edit Criteria Group. And this is where we need to change the information so that instead of level 5 being level 5, change that to high distinction, level 4 to distinction, level 3 to credit, level 2 to pass, and level 1 to fail. And so once you've changed those level names, you'll now need to change the criterion names. And so this is when you would go to the criteria that you have identified for this particular task, and either type in or copy and paste the complete criteria description, the complete criterion description. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking the text from a rubric that I had previously developed, and I had saved that into a table in a Word document, and now I'm simply copying the text that I had written up there, and I'm now pasting them here into these criterion. So you can see that each criterion can be longer than the box, and that's fine. So once you have updated the level names and the criterion names, you can then save, and that will take you back to the levels and criteria. And the next step is to change these level 5s in the overall score. So select the action arrow to the right of overall score, select edit levels, and again we're going to change level 5 to high distinction, level 4 to distinction, level 3 to credit, level 2 to pass, and level 1 to fail. Now the reason that I'm able to do that very quickly is because I have previously entered that information. So just by typing the first letter it remembers it. So if you are creating multiple rubrics, setting up these levels and changing the levels is always going to be the first step, regardless of the type of rubric that you use. So if you use the same computer and the same browser, you'll find that you also have the capacity to just very quickly make those changes after the first time you've created a rubric. So once you have got the levels described appropriately, you've entered the criteria, now it's time to add the standard descriptors. So to add the standard descriptors, select the action arrow to the right of the first criterion, select edit criterion, and you'll see now that the criterion name is here at the top of the page, and then after a little while each of the description and feedback fields open up. So this is when you now go to your previously written information, or if you're creating the rubric as you go, you'd probably start with the pass level, write the description for what it looks like to achieve the learning outcome that this criterion is assessing, and you would write that into the pass descriptor, and then from there you could then define each of the other criteria descriptors. But for this case I have previously done all of that work, and so for me it's now just simply a matter of copying and pasting. It will be best to use keyboard shortcut, so I'm using Control V to paste these words in here, and I'm now holding down Control and hitting the C button, Control A actually, to select everything, and then after I've selected everything I'm going to use these two dots, show all components. Click on this little arrow next to the dot point list, and I'm choosing align left. So that way the default is to align center. So if you want to align left so it looks a little bit nicer in presenting it to students, simply Control Alt and then align left. So it's now just a matter of copying the text that you had previously written, or creating the text as you go, and in each one we simply paste the language in, and paste the standard descriptor so that students have an understanding before they complete the assessment task of the sorts of things that they need to include, the sorts of things that they need to do as they complete their task, to demonstrate the level at which they have attained that aspect of the learning outcome. And in the fail descriptor, that's usually best where we describe what a misapprehension students may have about what is required. So it might be a description of something that is similar to but does not meet the requirements. So once you've put in the once you've pasted in the description, the standard descriptor for each of those standards, you can now see, and clicked on the save button, you'll now see that for this criterion we now have these descriptions here for each of those, and you simply repeat that action for each of these 3 criterion. If you've decided to use a points rubric, select points for the scoring method and then select hide scores from student views, as this will mean that students merely see the description, and so the written feedback and an indication of the grade rather than seeing any marks associated or score associated with that, and then select the save button. So you'll now have all the properties in place, and it's select the levels and criteria tab from the top of the page. Then the first step is to then select the action arrow to the right of the criteria and choose to edit criteria group. When you're editing the criteria group, you need to change the level names to the ones that we use at the University of Tasmania. So level 5 becomes high distinction, level 4 becomes distinction, level 3 becomes a credit, level 2 becomes a pass, and level 1 becomes a fail. Once you've completed naming the different levels and giving them the grade name, it's then time to change the points score. Now, the points score that you assign will depend on the number of criterion. So this in this rubric, there are 3 criteria that we will be using, and for the high distinction grade, we need to put in the maximum points. So when you have 3 criterion, that's a third, each one's worth a third, and so I'll put in the score of 33.33%. Now, that means that the rubric will actually add up to 99.99 rather than 100, but that actually, when you're using a weighted grading system, that actually doesn't matter, and the system will just process it, and it will work anyway. Now, if you've got 4 criterion, for example, you would have 25 would be the high distinction score, because 4 sets of 25 is totals to 100, and so on and so forth. And then in each of these remaining score points, we put the maximum, just like we have with the high distinction, you put the maximum number of points available within that particular grade level. So if 33 is 100, then 79% would be around about 26. For a credit, we're looking at 69%, and that would be just under 23, so I'm going to put 22.5. For a pass, 59% would be 19.5, and a fail would be, the maximum points for a fail would be 16. Now, if that's difficult to calculate, there is an Excel spreadsheet which provides for you those calculations already, and so you can use the link to access that, and you'll be able to work out what is the maximum number of points within that particular grade area. So it's essentially more than that is going to be the grade above. So 26.5, for example, would be a high distinction grade. So once you've worked that out, which can take some time, it's then a matter of in the criteria names is changing criterion 1 the actual criterion. Now, typically you would have, by the time you're setting up your MyLO site, setting up your rubrics in MyLO, you would have already determined what the criteria that you're using within the unit and also the criteria that you're using for each particular assessment task. So then it should just be a matter of copying and pasting from one document to another. So in this case, I'm just copying the criterion that I've recorded elsewhere and put them in here. Now you'll see that the criterion name field isn't that long, but you can insert a fair amount of text. Certainly the amount of text that a normal criterion, the amount of words that you would normally use for a criterion description would fit absolutely fine. So once you've set all of those things up, then you can hit the save button. And we can now see here that we've got the name of the grade, the points, the maximum points for each of those. Students again won't see that. That's for your benefit as the teacher, and you can see the criterion descriptions down here. We now need to update the overall score so that we have the correct names of the levels as grades and that the correct calculation is there. So select the action arrow to the right of overall score, select edit levels. And again, so now we change the level name from level 5 to a high distinction, and we set the start range to 80. So an HD at UTAS starts at 80%. Level 4 becomes distinction, and a distinction at UTAS starts at 70%. We put in a credit for level 3, and the credit starts at 60%. We put in pass for level 2, and a pass starts at 50%, and then we put in a fail for level 1, and that always is going to start at 0. So a fail is anywhere between 0 and 50. All right, and then we select the save button. So we can now see that we've got the grades correct here, we've got the score and the minimum. So here is the maximum, here is the minimum for the overall. And again, this is overall down here, and we've got the criteria. So the next step is to enter the standard descriptors. So we do that by selecting the arrow to the right-hand side of the first criterion, select Edit Criterion from the drop-down menu, and then again, as before, we copy and paste the standard descriptor from wherever we have written it. So I'll start with the HD descriptor because that's the first one there. When you're actually formulating the descriptions of the standards for each, the description of the standard for each grade within that criteria, you would usually start with the pass level, and in the pass level you write a description for what the student needs to demonstrate in order to show that they have met the learning outcome for the unit as measured through that particular criteria. So you write the pass level first, which describes everything the student needs to do to demonstrate attainment of the ILO through that criterion, and then you would look at the higher grades, at the higher passing grades above pass, so the credit, distinction and HD. But you always start with the pass, not with the HD. When you're copying and pasting, however, it's simpler to start with the HD. Once you've entered the text or pasted the text in, and normally you'll find that using keyboard shortcuts, so Control V is the best way to paste in. I'm then going to use the keyboard shortcut Control A to select all of that text. I'll use the Show All Components button, and then this little arrow next to the unordered list, and I'm going to select Align Left because that will then mean my text will be aligned to the left rather than the default, which is Center Align. I think it just looks nicer and is clearer for students if it's aligned left. So after you've copied the HD, copy and paste the distinction, Control all, select all, align left, copy and paste, Control V, oops, I didn't select all, align left, and then I'll just make sure that that's, yep, that's blue, so that worked, pass, Control C, Control V, Control A, align left, and then the pass. Now the fail. When describing a fail for students, that can often be a place where you describe things that students may think are sufficient, but which are not in fact sufficient. Now, it's a good idea to then select Save, and you'll see now that you have the criteria description there, and then you've got each of the standard descriptors, and you can see here that they're all aligned left, just because of that extra little step that I took. And you simply repeat that for each of the following criterion. And once you've done that, you can save and you're done. If you've chosen to use a custom points rubric, select Hide Scores from Student Views and then hit the Save button. You'll then need to select the Levels and Criteria tab, and we're going to select the action arrow to the right of the criteria heading and then choose to edit criteria group. Here we need to change the level names from level 5 to high distinction, from level 4 to distinction, level 3 to credit, level 2 to pass, and level 1 to fail. Now you'll have noticed that those options came up very quickly for me. That's because I've previously used this browser and this computer to create a custom points rubric, and therefore those level names are available to me quickly and easily. So that's something to note. So once you have put in the level names, you will then need to fill in the information about the criteria. So by the time you're at this stage, you'll have previously set up the criteria and know what those criteria are for this particular task. And so it's just should simply be a matter of copying and pasting from your records that you have elsewhere, maybe the unit outline, maybe your planning documents. And so it's simply a matter of here typing in the criterion names. Now, because this is a customs points rubric, and therefore each criteria has a different weighting, something that can be useful to do to help students with their understanding of what's expected of them is to actually put here in the criteria descriptor the weighting that is assigned for each of those. So I'm just adding those now. At the end, so that the students have access to that information, and they can therefore use that information to assist them as they develop develop their work and respond to that. So, and you'll notice that most of these are longer than the field is displaying, and that's not a problem. That should all still work. As long as your criterion descriptors are not too long, it will all appear there in the criterion name. So once you've done that, select the Save button, and you can see now that we've got the descriptor across here, and then we've got the criterion listed here. So now we need to update the overall score information. So select the action arrow to the right of overall score, and then select Edit Levels. And here we'll be updating the level name again so that it matches the grade names that we use here at UTAS. So level 5 becomes a high distinction, and the start range for a high distinction is 80%. Level 4 becomes distinction, and the percentage mark for a distinction at UTAS starts at 70. Level 3 becomes a credit, and that starts at 60%. Level 2 becomes a pass, and that starts at 50%. So, and then level 1 is a fail, and we don't need to enter that because that level 1's always going to start at 0%. So we'll save that, and we now have over here for the overall score, a high distinction is 80% or more, distinction 70 or more, credit 60 or more, and so on and so forth. So that's all nice and clear there. So the next step, of course, is to enter the standard descriptors, and also because it's a custom points one, as well as entering the text of the standard descriptors, we will also need to enter the marks. So to do that, we start with the first criterion, select the action arrow, and select edit criterion from the drop down menu. And just wait for that all to load up. So this one is worth, so just to double check, I'm going to go to the end of that criterion. Yes, that's worth 10%. So a maximum score for a high distinction is 10, and I'm just going to do the scores first because that's I think easier. So a maximum score for a distinction would be 7.5 because an 8 would be in the high distinction range. A credit would be 6.5 because 7 again would be equal to a distinction. A pass would be 5.5 because that's a maximum for a pass, because more than that would be the next step would be 6, which would actually be a credit, and then for a fail 4.5. So what we do is we put the maximum score for that particular grade level. Now I'm using 0.5 because the marks are assigned in 0.5 increments. If you were doing 0.1 increments, so for example, this would then, you would put in 4.9, 5.9, 6.9, 7.9. But if you're using, so it depends on whether you are wanting to work with 0.1 or simply half marks. That's entirely up to you, but whichever is the maximum is what you put in here. So now that we've got the points assigned, we need to work out, we need to copy and paste essentially the descriptor for each of these standards. So this is a standards descriptor for a high distinction level of this criterion. So I'm going to select all of the text that I've just put in, because I'm going to left align it so that when the students see it is aligned left. And then I copy and paste the distinction and align left, and then I'm going to copy, and I'm using the keyboard shortcut Control C to copy, keyboard shortcut Control V to paste, keyboard shortcut Control A to select all, and then I'm using the mouse to complete the others. So I then look for a pass description, paste that in, choose to align left, and then I'll paste in the fail description. Now as we do this, we're starting with the high distinction description and moving down to a fail description. However, when you actually sit down and develop the standard descriptors, you should start by writing out the pass standard description first, because that is describing to the students what is required as in order to demonstrate attainment of the ILO or part of the ILO that this particular criterion is measuring achievement of. So you describe that at the pass level. you describe what a pass looks like. So what does it look like to actually achieve the ILO? Because that is the minimum requirement for a pass. So once you've entered in all of the descriptions, select the Save button. And we can now see here that it will show up the points and then also the description that we used. So I'm now going to do the second criterion. So it's exactly the same steps that you use. However, if we look here, this one's worth 25%, so we can see there. So our high distinction is 25 because that's full marks. Our distinction, full marks for a distinction would be 19.5 if I'm again doing the 0.5 as maximum. Credit would be 17 because again 17.5 would put us into the distinction level. A pass would be 14.5 and therefore a fail would be 12. Now, in order to help you calculate what the maximum score is for each grade area, there is an Excel spreadsheet that provides information about that available for you in the staff resources description. So use that if you're finding it challenging to work it out in your head or with a calculator yourself. So again, we simply paste in. Now for this one, I will show you what it looks like when you don't choose to select align left, because the default is to center align. So we'll just see what that looks like, and it may be that you prefer that look anyway, so it's entirely up to you whether you choose to modify the alignment and to do that extra step. So once you've pasted in each of the descriptions for the standard, you'll see here. So again, we've now got the criterion worth 25%. That's the maximum points for each of those, and the description, which is just default center aligned. So it's up to you whether you do the extra step to left align it. And then you repeat that step for each of the following criteria. And then all you need to do is make it accessible to students and throughout your unit, which is the next step. So when you have completed filling in the criteria and the standard descriptors, and you've got your full rubric ready to roll, you can select close, and then using the action arrow you can go to set status and set the status to finalised. Once the status is set to finalised, it will then become available, and you'll be able to associate that rubric with assessments, with assignments, with grade items, and so on. And you'll also, once the rubric is associated with either a grade item or an assignment folder, you're then able to use that rubric to assess every individual student and create a copy of that rubric evaluation of the student work within each of those.